Real quick before starting, voting for this year's Toku Awards have gone live, and the voting over the last 24 hours has actually already matched last year's total votes. Voting will stay live until December 29th because the process of filming, editing, and putting together over 30 minutes of a award ceremony takes a long time. Just look at last year's for an example. Either way, the link for voting will be available in the description below, so go ahead and get to it. And then come back. Also, submissions for this year's TokuDebt are also live. Send in a video about a minute or so in length. You can go over by a little bit if you've bought that much, and send that over to zioagito@gmail.com. And make sure that you title it TokuDebt 2023. Make sure to include your screen name and make sure that your video also includes how much you totally spent this year. And remember, we're not counting pre-orders. It has to have released this year. So don't count that in your total debt count. That would be for next year's video. All this to find out who gets that coveted TokuDebt crown as we all collectively cry to our bank accounts. Now with that being said, let's go ahead and get on to this week's KingOhger. Look, man, I'm just gonna say it. You were technically right. You even called this almost beat for beat on the Tokutonic livestream you did a couple weeks back. Listen, you're right, but I didn't want to be right. Oh God, you're actually making me feel sorry for you. Look, just take this personal L and make it into the dub you deserve. I guess. It's been a long time coming. Hiromi, King of Elves, Daiji, Crown Prince of Elves, combine together to become Shining Form. Nope. Really? Okay. We've returned with the plot twist from last week that ended up getting doubled down on this week. An added B-plot that kinda negated from the overall after effects of things, and plot twists that you could see coming almost a whole planetary system away. With this week's KingOhger. We start things off with everyone collectively attempting to beat the cosmic out of Dugdead, only for it to be as ineffective as opening up a tin can with a straw. Speak for yourself. Gross. Well, to save on the budget, Dugdead goes ahead and makes a construct of Daigorg shows up. And without the castle, they can't do shit, which is why Deboski's got a plan. Because he unprovokingly reveals that Suzume is really on their side. So accessing the castle should just be easy. He just needs that lance. All this while the Ridiculous gets the stroke game from Dugdead while keeping that shit saran wrapped. Turns out that the previous revelation about Gira is still right on the money. Meaning that Team Real is winning this fight. But as an immortal, Racles will need the abilities afforded only to the Jesters in order to take Gira down. And he's got the shenanigans and the plan to entertain the audience of one. But first, we gotta fight some grunts, get that castle, and reuse footage from episode 23 for budgetary reasons and get back to the plot. Because the Kings return home, all to a bad case of explosive gas, sitting on those cushions that if they ain't pushing, they are going boom. This is all one part of the plan, as with the Kings out of the way, this order will fill the world, all while Racles loads up folks on his castle and goes to another world. This message is brought to you by DX King Caucasus Castle. Get yours today. Oh wait, Damn, I guess I need to get one today because I don't even have one. So, while Yama tries figuring out how to disarm the bombs, Hillbill is used to not only convince Hat Guy to cause mass panic up to the castle, but also to get the retainers to coerce the kings into dropping their deuces and going kaboom! This all comes as Racles and Gira finally start their rematch, which is just the news the Boski needed to stop playing the act and get the fuck out of there, while everyone else deals with their own real bombs. Though, Shiokata's shenanigans lead Yama down the right path to disarm. But by then, Gira and Racles already knee-deep in pyrotechnics. But look, it wouldn't technically be a Gira and Racles fight without Gira bringing up the past. But that just pours copious salt on the wounds, until the Boski shows on up to drive a stake in there too, giving Racles all the big king dick energy necessary to toss Gira out like a ragdoll. Finally, we've come to understand just how deep the Boski and Racles' scheme goes, as the two show that they are really playing up the bit the whole time, with him taking off in the castle, while Racles has met the quota to get the powers necessary to fell a god. He's got his Monado, and he knows how to use it, taking it right to TokuDebt's chest and revealing that he was a good guy the whole time. Rating time. So I have to admit, this episode has faults. And I can already see keyboard warriors lining up. Look, the pacing is all over the place. The budget looked to be about as dry as my bank account. And yes, what I did not want to happen, happened. But there is something about how this whole execution went, and it actually ended up saving this episode, making it go all the way to the Shinken S! So first of all, that bomb plot point with the tickling and the distractions are a tonal whiplash to everything that's happened leading up to this episode and what bookends this episode to begin with. It was a jarring holdback. The Daigorg revival was literally a cost-saving time pad. Because, for real, if you go back to episode 23 of KingOhger, the shots of Caucasus Castle with Daigorg are the exact same. Which, with these flaws being said, this episode would have rated much lower in terms of their overall score. But the execution and the deliveries from both Racles' and the Boski's actors were the extra credit to get this thing up to an S rank. They both have been playing the long game, and it looks like all roads do lead back to the fury of the gods. I think it was about 2 weeks ago on that Tokutonic where I speculated that the route they could take towards redeeming Racles could be similar to how the prologue of Dragon Ball Super Broly goes, where Racles had early interactions with TokuDebt, something about it just didn't rub him right, and since then, he's been formulating a plan to defeat him. Similar to how when Vegeta saw Frieza interact with his own father, knowing that he was scared of the legendary Super Saiyan, that he would work towards that goal in mind. And from the looks of next week's preview, it looks like I was right on the money with that one. Though now with Racles showing that he's been playing the long game, and with the Boski being in the know for probably the same length, it's easy to see how much they've played the rest of the cast. And I know people have consistently given me heat for saying that Suzume actually likes Racles, but from this, we can gauge that they both already knew the real intentions, and she probably knows how the real Racles is and knows that he's playing a facade in front of everybody else. So she's also playing the bit. So they kept the act up while the others were in sight or while they felt that they were being watched. It's very possible that because they knew of TokuDebt in general, they felt that they were always being watched, and thus why they had to play the bit the way that they did. The biggest glaring issue that I have is that we still don't know how Racles survived the fall after being beat by Gira previously, and what exactly he was doing for those 2 years. Especially since he did leave behind the Ohger Caliber Zero. And I'm surprised that if it was in the castle this whole time, why Gira wasn't just dual wielding from the start of the time skip. Though now that we know how deep the long game actually goes, and given Suzume's reaction after the death, one could assume that either Deboski, his people, or even Suzume herself actually saved Racles from the fall and sheltered him until things could excel to their current point. Either way, part of me wanted to wait until we got more details with next week's episode in terms of how this all ends up turning out. Because although this week did double down on last week's revelations being indeed real, or real enough for TokuDebt to believe that Gira is indeed immortal, and thus giving Racles those abilities, next week we'll see just exactly how that came to be. Though there is a lot going on next week, and usually giving such an exposition and backstory raises massive amounts of death flags. So, is Racles done next week? Especially since now that the Ohger Caliber Zero has become the big plot MacGuffin to beat TokuDebt and the other jesters without the need of that one-time power-up, would Gira, in turn, stop using his Ohger Caliber to transform? Or will he end up giving his to someone else, or the Ohger Caliber to someone else? I mean, I did speculate very early on, once we actually got the introduction of Suzume, that I thought that she would end up joining the team. And at the time, I thought that she would be a replacement for Deboski on the roster, but what if she's actually a replacement for Racles on the roster? After all, if Racles does indeed perish, well, she's still a royal to both Tofu and Shugadam. But yes, though some things this week was handled sloppily, the execution is what needed to land, and I personally felt that the execution did land. But I do know that this will be yet another divisive episode amongst the community. And I will admit that I am getting a little bit too tired of every villain being redeemed in modern media. But I'll give this one a pass just because reviewing this show from the very beginning, week to week, and doing the deep dive analytics that I have been doing in this show, it all just fits in terms of the nitty-gritty and its foundations. I can't fault its current execution. It was done well, but it also depends on how good next week's backstory dives deeper into it as well. With that being said, how did you feel about this week's KingOhger? The redemption of it all, the budget, and the lack of aiming for the head. Anyway, that's it from me. Until next time, bye.